Hey everyone, hope you're doing well today. We're going to talk about the fast paced news cycle and why it's that way. A lot of people will wonder, why is the news cycle so fast? And essentially, it's like that to manufacture a consensus or a misperceived consensus in the voter base. If we look back or think back into the news cycle, perhaps the last three big things, anything that comes to mind is never really addressed. It's just kind of used as a leapfrog to the next portion of the news cycle. And this is a big factor in the manufacturing of consensus, or at least the consensus that's being portrayed to us. And you can think of anything, any big contention in science, or social unrest. They say there's a consensus, right, on the TV, but because of how the corporations can influence both science and policy, as well as public funding, there really isn't a consensus per se. For instance, there's still a debate after 100 years about gravity or about the nature of light. Is it an emanation or is it a perturbation? This type of thing. And you could do anything with global climate change. You could do it with the abiotic qualities of crude oil or anything pretty much. There's never really a consensus, because that's how science works. There's always varying theories and theories that make it to the top and to the bottom. And within those theories, there are proponents with their own criteria and details bringing forth to the world, just to broaden the horizons of our perceptions. And yet on TV and on social media, especially with doctors, for instance, they say that there's this 99% consensus or 90% consensus, which is never the case. We're being presented a corporate version of science and social health care and civic resources, this type of thing. And part of the reason for the fast pace of the news cycle is to foster a reliance in the voter base on this misperceived manufactured consensus, which doesn't exist. Science is constantly writing and rewriting new theories, new explanations. And the reason why the consensus is so important is because it essentially facilitates the status quo. Why does the news cycle go so fast? We don't have time to address any one topic in particular, and it's kind of like a overstimulus, or it kind of makes the viewer in this mindset of like deferral, or it's too crazy, we just let the experts handle it. And this is a fallacy of appealing to authority a lot of the times, or appealing to ignorance, when we don't know, so let's just be safe. Let's be safe instead of let's be sorry. And this is like an appeal to ignorance. If we really care about these things, then we should be investigating them personally and rejecting the fast pace of the news cycle, because the fast pace of the news cycle pretty much retards scientific development, social discourse. It enhances the fracture of social demographics, the fracturing, because it's like, okay, well, they'll throw on one thing for this demographic, and then they'll throw on another thing for another demographic, and then those two demographics will fight against each other instead of working together as a whole people to address either one of them. And we're just kicking the can down the road every day, every week, month, every year, and here we are today where the corporations have all this power, they're regarded as individuals. The government is now just a kind of pseudo corporation itself, like acting on behalf of corporations, obviously, with these weird subsidies and trade agreements. And the news cycle being so fast is part of the problem, both for liberals and conservatives, any type of voter or political ideology. They are pretty much bound up with this fast pace of the news cycle. So the way that our proper society works is we each have our own desires and our own kind of predispositions. Are we science? Are we art? Are we philosophy? Are we humanities? Are we humanitarians? And so the human people, they naturally distribute their people to do all the things. We always have enough people to grow food. We always have enough people to make music. We always have enough people to make art, philosophy, education. So usually, without the news cycle, there's always going to be someone or some contingent of people who are working on these issues and making sure that they don't continue down the road. Whereas with the fast-paced news cycle and this like hyper-influencing Whereas with the fast-paced news cycle and the influencing of our priorities, that's kind of like ends up in like a hijacking of our the way that we address different priorities. Like for instance, Flint, Michigan. Okay, the government was able to mobilize all this money for this medical treatment, quote unquote, for millions of people, and yet they don't have enough money or the willpower to get clean water to Flint, Michigan. Why? And with the fast-paced news cycle, we just kind of gloss over this really fast, but it's actually an important part of everything, because where we see the government spend the money and where we don't see the government spend the money tells us a lot about what's going on, irrespective of the propaganda found from the conservatives or the propaganda found from the progressive liberals. The actions in terms of funding from the government tells us exactly what we need to know without having to rely on these portrayals in either of the voter base. And when we get used to this kind of idea in recognizing the true nature of how government operates with this shadow funding component, then we can begin to liberate ourselves and each other from it by utilizing our own conscious intent. What do you really care about? What do you care about? What gets you going when you see this stuff on the TV? If there's one thing more than another thing that gets you going, then that's your calling. That's what you're supposed to be doing, and letting everybody know about all these different perspectives. And the hyper dependence on like this single discipline, like, are you a programmer, are you an engineer? Back in the day, it didn't used to be like that. People were more of like a Renaissance mindset where they could do science, they could do art, they could do agriculture and animal husbandry, they can do all of this stuff. Whereas today we're kind of taught to just do one thing, and that's a big part of the problem, because with this fast-paced news cycle, we only have individuals who are predisposed to perform one job or one function. And quite often, like for instance, a doctor won't really know about molecular physiology, or a climate scientist won't really know about interstellar cosmological dynamics, or solar dynamics, or anything really. And that presents a big problem to us, because we need kind of like a comprehensive approach for a lot of these problems. They're not just science or just physics related or just human related. there's a lot of other things that need to be addressed in a more comprehensive society, or by a more comprehensive society, to actually address these issues, instead of just receiving these issues passively through the fast-paced news cycle, and we just keep getting the same issues. Okay, Flint, Michigan doesn't have water. Okay, it's been a couple months. Oh, Elon Musk is getting water filters for Flint, Michigan. Okay, they still don't have water. Okay, it's been another couple of months. Oh, they still don't have water. There's another protest. And the reason why that keeps happening is because of this compartmentalization of knowledge and power in these different voter bases that are kept separate and distinct instead of holistic and comprehensive. So I hope everybody thought this was interesting. Yeah, do your best to explain this to your family and your loved ones, because everybody is like hanging on this fast-paced news cycle, and it really doesn't do any good. It just causes more anxiety and more sadness. And so once we kind of step back and see how the fast-paced news cycle is utilized by these government corporation entities, then we can kind of liberate ourselves and become less anxious and more empowered, because we're going to be actually doing something instead of just partying, or actually doing something instead of just voting, or actually participating in the research ourselves personally, rather than just aligning our views with a perceived consensus that doesn't exist, that the TV tells us, oh, 99% of scientists agree. Well, that's impossible. Did they interview 10 million scientists to generate this figure that we see on the TV? I mean, all of this stuff it's really tricky how they present it to us, and it's always very, very enticing, and it makes a lot of sense on the surface, and then people are like, oh, well, that's what it is. But reasonable people, or more well-read people, or more multidisciplinary people will look at these generalizations, and they'll start to question and wonder why they're being presented to us, because all of these things, for instance, like the false dichotomy, oh, it's these guys, no, it's these guys, all of these things are perceived to us as oversimplified, very oversimplified, whereas the experts, so-called scientists in the field themselves are locked in intense debate with people who do not agree. Some people agree, some people don't agree. I mean, that's just the nature of science. There's no consensus. Like I said earlier, like the nature of light or the nature of gravity, the abiotic qualities of crude oil, the solar influences, like solar forcing, what they call in climate science. So yeah, thanks guys. See you later.